Thank you, Casey.
Yeah. So welcome to the Braille talk on Braille Embossers. As Casey mentioned, I'm Carl Bolander. I'm a non-visual accessibility analyst at the National Federation of the Blind here in Baltimore. And Matt?
Sorry about that. I've got some background noise that I'm contending with, so I'm trying to keep that as much off the call as I can. Anyway, yes, I am Carl's colleague at the NFB. My job title is non-visual access technology specialist. So Carl and I are going to be, again, discussing Braille embossers, why you need one, how to choose one, what are some that are out on the market. So Carl, if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Sure. So Braille embossers, the basics is what, they are really just the devices that put Braille onto paper. There's a few different options and things we'll get into in details, but they connect to your computer. You use a piece of software to make a Braille, what's called a Braille ready file, or BRF. And that file is then sent to the Braille embosser, which uses pins to emboss the document onto Braille paper, similar to how a regular ink printer would. Some of the variations, which we'll talk to more about, you can get ones that just do Braille on one side of the page, or double-sided, which is called interpoint. Some are better at graphics, and some have wireless capabilities. Different ones will have different levels of options that you can choose depending on what you're looking for. So why would you want a Braille embosser over a Braille display? Braille embossers, they do hard copy Braille, whereas Braille display is just one line at a time. Braille displays are good for using your computer, reading, if you don't mind using auto scroll or hitting the button after each line, writing documents, things like that. Where an embosser can be really helpful is in things where you need to see the vertical setup, reviewing a table, looking at, say, a long division math problem. Doing one of those on a Braille display is awkward at best. I have been there. Or solving an algebraic equation. Done that as well. And it can be doable on a Braille display if you have good tracking and can understand, keep in your head what's going on, but it's not easy, and having it in hard copy Braille is much easier. Matt, do you have something?
Yeah. Another couple of applications that have come to mind for me. One that I hadn't thought of before, but came up in some recent work that we did helping some students get Braille testing. A difference between hard copy Braille and electronic Braille there in test situations, for example, is if you need to refer back and forth to different parts of the exam, it's much easier to be able to do that with hard copy Braille, to read the question, read parts of the answer, go back to a reading passage that the question might be asking about. So a situation where you're randomly skipping between different parts of the overall document. Again, while it's possible to do it with refreshable Braille, it's much more cumbersome, and it's a lot easier. You can even have 2 or 3 different pages set out side by side of a hard copy version. And then another instance that some people might find more useful to have hard copy is with Braille music. If you're working with a Braille music score, whether it's a 2-handed part or a 3-part, for example, for organ music, where you have things lined up vertically, again, like Carl talked about, tabular situations, in this case, seeing how the music lines up. It's just much more convenient and much easier to understand looking at a hard copy Braille document to read that than to try and read it on a Braille display.
Yep. And another reason area where hard copy Braille is useful is some of these embossers have the capability of producing tactile graphics. Looking at, especially on a Braille display, looking at a graph or chart doesn't really work when all you can see is one line at a time, because you lose all context and spatial information. Also, yeah, you can kind of get the idea from a text description for a simpler graphic, but if you're dealing with a more complex thing or something, you have to find an area or something like that, it's going to be fairly difficult to do without hard copy Braille. So, why would you want a Braille display in the home, and what do you need to think about when you want to get one? So having a Braille embosser in the home can be useful for a number of circumstances. If your teacher gives you a long handout that they've created, maybe it's 5 or 10 pages, being able to emboss that, take it with you, have a Braille copy of it on the side while you're answering a worksheet about it, so you don't need to keep alt-tabbing back and forth between other, multiple things on your computer, or navigating through different things. You can have, if you want to take something to read outside or in the car away from your computer, you can put it in Braille. Notes for a presentation. Many people find it easier to read Braille notes for a presentation rather than trying to listen to JAWS or NVDA in one ear while giving a coherent presentation. So also for testing, you could print out tactile graphics or longer equations that it would help you to see, lined up vertically the way they were intended, rather than as we discussed on a Braille display.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the factors and some differences that you can find in different models of Braille embossers. First thing to point out, there are different ways that the paper is fed into a Braille embosser. There are tractor-fed embossers and there are cut sheet-fed embossers. Tractor-fed may be familiar to some people, although it's been a long time since I've seen printers, normal printers that take tractor-fed sheets, but it's the kind of fan fold where the sheets are all connected together. Usually they have on the margins a strip that has holes in it that allow the paper to get rolled through the printer. They used to be a lot more common with inkjet printers as well, but again, that goes back a ways. A lot of Braille embossers are tractor fed that way, but there are also some that you can take a stack of sheets individually cut, and so those are referred to as cut sheet fed embossers. Another difference between different embossers that you'll see is some are only able to print or emboss single-sided. And then there are some that print on both or emboss on both sides, which are referred to as interpoint. So again, whether it's important to you to have that double-sided feature, of course, it cuts down the number of sheets that you have to emboss on. If you can read interpoint, some people that are newer at Braille, it may be a little bit more difficult distinguishing the dots on both sides, because you can also kind of feel the impression of the dots that are on the other side of the page. Characters per second, or sometimes it may be listed as sheets per minute, how many sheets the printer can print in a certain given amount of time. A consideration that is not necessarily a metric or a specification that you'll see on a particular embosser, but just thinking about in mind how much volume of Braille you're going to be embossing. Are you just going to need, maybe 5 or 10 sheets of Braille at a time? Or are you looking to buy an embosser for a higher volume situation where, for example, maybe 5 or 10 people may be purchasing an embosser to use collectively and brailing a larger volume of, for example, worksheets for students. And then, of course, graphic capability. There are lower priced and more inexpensive models that now are capable of also embossing tactile graphics in addition to literary braille. And wireless connectivity can be a consideration. Most embossers are capable of connecting by USB. Some have networking capabilities where the embosser can be put on a local area network and multiple computers can print to it. And then whether that needs to be hardwired or whether it's also compatible with wireless printing. Some of them today can connect to wireless networks, and so you don't have to have them at a specific location close to a router or close to a particular computer that they're printing from. Next, we'll kind of talk about transcription software. Carl, do you want to
Sure.
give a little talk about software?
Yeah. So in order for any embosser, you can't just take a Microsoft Word document, hit print, select the embosser, and expect it to come out as a well-structured Braille document. You need Braille translation software, or sometimes called transcription software, but basically you need a software package to convert from a regular text or Word or web page or whatever document into a Braille document. And there are a few well-known packages out there. The Duxbury Braille translator, you may have heard of. It's been around forever. I used, way back in the ancient years, I used to use Duxbury for DOS in elementary school to do some work. It's very powerful, works with pretty much any Braille embosser you can think of, can handle math, all sorts of other functions. It's somewhat expensive though. I believe $6.99 is the current price for it.
Yeah, that sounds close.
Yeah, and is really kind of the professional standard for embossing, especially if you're a transcriber. Another one called the Tiger software suite. This is designed by a company called ViewPlus. We'll talk about some of their embossers a little later. And what it offers is, it has, also to mention, both it and Duxbury have a feature where you can connect them to Microsoft Word, so that if you have a Word document that you formatted with headings and everything else, you can do the translation to Braille through this plugin right in Word and then emboss the document from there. The Tiger software suite also has graphics capabilities, because ViewPlus is one of the more graphics heavy companies that does embossed graphics well. A newer one from American Printing House for the Blind, which is free, Tiger software suite, if I'm not mistaken, is a few $100 as well. Braille Blaster, however, from APH is free, and it does document translation, handles math capabilities. You might want to talk a little bit more about Braille Blaster.
Yeah, so as Carl said, that is APH's product. And I've been pretty impressed with it. I'm not by any means a professional transcriber. However, I've played around a little bit in both Duxbury and Braille Blaster. Given that Braille Blaster is available free of charge, it's a pretty robust piece of software today. They've done a lot developing it. It started out as a tool for quickly being able to just emboss. Is NIMUS the standard, Carl, that textbooks are generally delivered in?
Yeah, the NIMUS.
Yeah. So it started out just as a product for being able to kind of quickly quick and dirty emboss a textbook that way. But APH has gone a long way in adding a lot of capabilities to it to make it fairly comparable to Duxbury. They've also gone a long way in providing a lot of training resources online to help people learn how to use Braille Blaster. So I feel like, especially if you're already kind of balking a little bit at the price of an embosser itself, then to add another $700 for software to transcribe, a Word document, for example, into something that's ready to be sent to an embosser. But Braille Blaster is a really good alternative to consider.
Yep. And then, there are other softwares out there. There's one I know of that I don't have much experience with called Braille 2000. And there may be other translators out there that are designed to work with specific embossers or for specific tasks. But by and large, those are the main pieces of software that can get your Braille document ready to emboss. Before we get into embosser specifics, we'll see if there's any questions. If you do have a question, you can raise your hand on the desktop, Alt-Y. There's a button on the iPhone app, or *9 on the phone. And if the host, Tina, if you could please just, if someone does raise their hand, call on them and unmute them, and we'll take their question.
Also, just for those folks using the Zoom app on your iPhone, you do have to open the participant list to get to where the raised hand button is.
Do you have someone with a question?
No one with a question.
Okay. And we shall continue. So there are a number of different Braille embossers out there. A couple of the more basic ones, and I'll get into why I call these basic in a minute. View Plus has one called the Braille, and IRI-AT, which also sells View Plus products and has done some of their modifications to them for their own devices, is called the Braille Buddy. These are cheaper embossers. They only do 25 characters per second, so they're going to be a little slower. They only do single-sided Braille, so no interpoint. You can do, it will use twice the amount of paper if you're doing a large volume. And these, the Braille Buddy's 1,500, Braille's 2,000. And what these are good for, in my opinion, is if you're just the type where, I want to look at this, this part of a spreadsheet in Braille, to Braille a page or two, or you need to emboss a small amount of Braille or an occasional larger volume. These are kind of, not to cheapen them, but they're kind of like the Braille embosser equivalent of the inexpensive, Walmart inkjet printer. They'll get the job done. If you try to print a textbook on it, it might throw a fit, but otherwise it'll get the basics done. They don't have any extra bells and whistles or fancy features that many of the others have.
Sorry, Carl.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the next level up in complexity then are kind of the home embossers. So these include View Plus has a couple of models, the Columbia and the Delta, then IRI-AT, again, which partner pretty closely with View Plus. They have their Track 120, which is a tractor-fed print embosser, and the Sheet 120, which is basically the same model, but sheet-fed. These products generally include the ability to print interpoint. And sorry, I'm skipping over the Humanware Romeo and Juliet printers. So these can handle higher volume of Braille, generally will emboss a little bit faster. And again, So looking at the IRI ones again, you have both tractor fed and sheet fed models.
Yep. And some of these also have wireless capabilities. The View Plus ones especially can handle textographics. View Plus, that's kind of what they're known for. The Humanware Romeo is still a single-sided embosser, but most of these, as Matt said, are interpoint. And these range price-wise from about $3,500 to $5,000, depending on what you want to do. These will also handle a larger volume of Braille. You know, we've tested the Columbia and some other Braille embossers in this level before. And if you need to crank out a 300-page textbook, you know, it may take a few hours, but as long as you make sure where the paper is going that it stays clear and doesn't get caught up or jammed, it's going to do it. It'll put out a quality product. Some of these also have little bells and whistles where, like, you can adjust via a device you can turn on the embosser, you know, the dot strength for if you're doing Braille pages or thinner paper. Some of these will also have, I think I said wireless connectivity. The Columbia and Delta will come with the Tiger software suite. So if you're in the line for a View Plus embosser, some of them will actually come with the software, so that you don't need to make that extra purchase. And then once you get through those, you get into some of the more advanced embossers. These will start doing faster lines, more characters per second. All of these will do interpoint. Some of these will work off even rolls of paper that can be cut to size. Most or many more will do cut sheet now, and these go above 5,000 all the way up. You can do things such as like there's one called the View Plus Spot Dot, which has the capability to do print and Braille on the same sheet of paper, so that you can have, you know, a dual vision book, as some places will call them. Some, like there's one by Index called the Braille Box, which uses cut sheets. It's definitely a much larger embosser than many of the others, but it can still sit on a tabletop and can still convey, you know, work in an office, but it's designed for higher volume cut sheet production. Some of these might be useful is, say, for a school district that has multiple blind students, or during COVID, you know, if a few families wanted to work together within a school district and have an embosser that multiple people could use, you know, it may be more effective to get one, you know, Index Everest embosser, which is another one of the more advanced ones that several groups share, than to get 3 or 4 Embrails. Everest is going to do a lot more. It's going to be able to handle a lot more, and it's more effective. Now, the downside to that, of course, is if you're relying on one embosser and that one embosser breaks, well, then you have no embossers. Where if you have a couple cheaper ones, it can you can send one of them out to get repaired, and you still have one or more other embossers that keep working. And then even above those, there are commercial full big embossers that require, you know, a solid floor mount, that require multiple, you know, like air compressors, and work off 100-pound sheets of rolled sheets of paper. But those are more intended for a, you know, large school district. Let's say, you know, just as a hypothetical, you know, the Los Angeles school district, you know, all of Los Angeles schools has 100 Braille blind kids, and they need to produce large quantities of Braille. That's probably about the smallest group that I would recommend. Something like one of the big, the brand name that does most of those is called Braille. and that they can get something like that. But for most people, one of the lower, less expensive View Plus ones, the Irie ones or the Humanware ones that they sell are going to serve most people just fine and will work very well.
All right. A final option that some people it may be appropriate for is to consider purchasing a used embosser. Of course, there are pros and cons. The most obvious upside is you'll generally be able to find something less expensive. And especially if you do kind of need to look for something that does have more features, but are trying to keep the cost down, looking for a used embosser could be an option for you. Caveats, of course, being you don't know how heavily it's been used, what maintenance might be like for it. Depending on how old it is, sometimes it can be harder to get support or to get replacement parts for it. But it can be an option to at least get yourself up and going for a little bit. It's possible to find embossers that way on eBay, as well as Blind Bargains and some of the other classified services that offer access to blind and low vision products. You can find people selling used equipment.
Yeah.
So I think. Oh, sorry, Carl. Go ahead.
The one thing to be careful of is you will often find very old embossers, that run using old connection types such as parallel ports or serial ports. Some of these are made, 30 years ago, and you can get them to work with modern computers if you know the right set of buttons to, settings to push and the right adapter cable to buy, and it is possible to get them to work. But if you're not as techy or don't have the time to be like, okay, I need to set up a generic text printer on COM port 7 because that's what device manager says this thing is connected to, it may not be the most viable option. You may want to, confine your search to more modern devices that have USB connectivity. Any questions about the Braille embossers, different ones that are out there, types of embossers, that, etc.? Again, please raise your hand and we will be happy to talk with you.
Kimberly Banks has a question.
Hey there, I have a question. My daughter is getting ready to go to college, so we were kind of looking for something that's more budget, but something that's movable. And we were also thinking about buying used. So is there like a Honda Civic of Braille embossers that can go 10 years and 100,000 miles and not give me any problems that I can buy used and not really worry about? Or is it better to just bite the bullet and buy something a little cheaper, a little less low, or a little more low tech, that's new?
I mean, see, back in the day, and I hate the way technology is trending to, more plastic and stuff, but some of the old enabling technologies, Romeo and Juliet embossers, I mean, like they have the one called the Juliet Pro 60. That thing, I've seen them at the NFB. That thing is built like a tank. I mean, it weighs probably 40 pounds, so it's not the most transportable, but it's this solid metal case with handle grips on the sides and the metal cover, and it's just built to last. The problem is you'll run into that technology stuff like I was talking about earlier, where most of them are designed for much older computer systems. So unless your child is fairly tech savvy and can futz around with device manager and things, I'd probably not recommend those. What you might look into is something like, there were a couple more recent enabling technologies, Braille embossers, before Humanware got a hold of them. I think one was called the Trident and the Phoenix. Those, you could probably still find those kicking around on eBay. Also, there's a company out of Sweden called Index Braille embossers, which are also sold in the US by one of the two companies. I think Humanware sells a couple of theirs now. And they're on version 5, so you could probably find a version 4 or version 3 of that embosser that would work just fine for you. Now you'll lose some of like the wireless connectivity, but you could probably get it for cheaper.
Okay, and one other question. We mostly need an embosser for, or she mostly needs an embosser for tactile graphics and graphs. We won't need it so much for, you know, heavy, fast Braille. Does that change your answer at all?
It does, unfortunately, drastically.
Okay.
View Plus all the way.
View Plus, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would agree with Carl on that. View Plus, they are known for tactile graphics, especially in the kind of consumer end market. That's really their bread and butter.
Okay. And that you said was it in the like the $3,500 range?
Yep. Now you might, again, used wise, they used to make embossers under the Tiger brand name. They don't really, they've kind of retired that for their embossers, but they had one like the Cub, I think there was a Junior, and then the Max. So if you look for embossers under the Tiger brand name, they're older View Plus embossers that should still serve well and will do very good tactile graphics.
Okay, okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
I saw that there was a question in the chat about paperweight, but I didn't catch all of it and read it all, but I didn't know if Casey had caught that, or if Tina, you saw that there was a question in the chat about paperweight being the same for Perkins, Braillers, and embossers. I want to get the question right, though.
Yeah, Rob Harris has the question. He's got a two-part question here. And he said, is there a good alternative to heavyweight Braille paper when in a pinch, say like at Walmart or an office supply store? And also, can you discuss the noise level and ways to remedy the noise level if shared in a work environment?
Two very good points. Paper-wise, a lot of modern embossers now have the ability to set the dot strength. They'll usually be a light strength, so you can get away with using a standard or even somewhat slightly heavyweight copy paper, which should work. But as far as, you know, I don't have a specific paper recommendation, but I just find, you know, and it will also depend on if you have something that can handle regular sheets of paper or if you'll need tractor because that will also impact what you can get. But if you can find just a kind of thicker, heavier, regular paper or light construction paper, something like that would probably work reasonably well. And then as far as noise level goes, I mean, they're not, modern embossers aren't quite as loud as, you know, some of the old embossers were, but they're still, you know, fairly up there. I mean, yes, it's possible to stand, you know, several feet away and carry on a conversation from some of these. They're not that drastically loud. Ways to mitigate them, I would be concerned. You could put them in, you know, like a computer slot under a desk if they had good airflow and if there was room for the paper, which could help. If you have a small closet or storage room, you could set the embosser up in there and shut the door, things like that. But they are better than they used to be. I'll definitely say that.
We have a question from a telephone user. Your last 4 digits, 2829.
Yes, we have a caller from a telephone user.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. And my question is also about tactile graphics, and I'm asking on behalf of a friend. She has to look at diagrams, simple diagrams like bar charts and things like that in PowerPoint. And so she was wondering, is View Plus also the model of choice for that? And how simple or cumbersome is the process to emboss something like that?
Okay, so that also brings up a very good point. Thank you for your question. Tactile graphics, you can't assume, just, oh, I have this JPEG of a graph, it's good to go. Generally, we often hold or occasionally hold tactile graphics webinars and things that we would encourage you to, attend, or you can reach out to us if you want more information on tactile graphics specifically. But generally, tactile graphics have to be prepared so that essentially they're grayscale, that is black, white, black dark lines standing out against a light background. And the embosser will generally print the dots so that the darker the color it is on the page, the more pronounced the dots. So like if you had, say, a black graph with a light gray shading, you'd get, a nice strong full Braille dotted line followed by, just much lighter Braille dots for the shading inside. So it will require some, some prep, most likely by a sighted individual before the graphics are ready. That said, if the teacher has the PowerPoint ready ahead of time, it should be fairly straightforward to get those graphs prepped, and then you could emboss them for the day that you need them.
And then I see a hand raised. Kit Aronoff.
Yeah, thank you. So I have two questions, one for myself and one for my university. But so I have an old index basic D, and it's 12 years old. So I don't know how old that is in embosser terms, but I'm always sort of like scared it's just gonna die one day. What is the life expectancy of those indexes?
I mean, it's going to largely depend on how much it's used.
Okay.
If you're brailing, a couple pages every so often, I mean, unless one of the connections and sides corrodes or, some non-metallic piece just disintegrates on you, it's going to run for, almost forever.
It's another one of those cases where almost the technology and software to support it is likely to go obsolete sooner than the physical hardware will wear out. Especially the indexes are known for their longevity. So
great. My other question is for our school. I think they have a Juliet, and we are trying to launch a tactile graphics department. Or well, I say department, but I mean me. And I'm trying to. I inherited this from a different department that purchased the device without ever talking to anybody. So I just sort of have this device. Is there a way to get it to work with tactile view?
Which is it, the newer Juliet that's made by Humanware that looks a lot like the indexes, where it's that flatter one, or is it the old big metal,
It's a newer one. It was bought, I think, 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay. Made by Humanware?
I think so.
Okay. Those will do some, restricted tactile graphics, but the problem is they don't have, like the View Plus ones, they can vary the strength that the pins hit and move the pins closer together and do all sorts of fancy stuff. Whereas things like the Juliet can sort of do tactile graphics, but you'll lose some of the resolution that you'd get with, say, a View Plus.
All right, good to know. Oh, and one quick question. Sorry, everybody. Is there a way to get the tractor feed to stop jamming? Because I feel like every time I use my stupid embosser, it jams, and I have no idea why.
To make the tractor feed, you want to make sure there's space so that the paper stays taut between them, but you're not like stretching it so far you're tearing the tractor feed, and not close enough that the paper is bubbling in the middle. One of those two things would have a lot to do with it.
Okay.
And then the other thing is making sure it has a flat, clear path out the back of the embosser, and then can either drape toward the floor or has a flat table it can pile up on or something.
Okay. So if it's able to go to the floor, it'll be okay?
It should be, yeah. You either want just room for it to dangle down. The one drawback of going to the floor is once there is enough paper to reach the floor, you want to make sure that it starts laying down and folding itself comfortably, rather than just kind of getting caught somewhere and crumpling up and, you know.
Okay. Excuse me. Thank you very much. This is helpful.
Happy to help. Got a couple minutes left if there's any last questions.
Is there, this is Sarah, I can't raise my hand, but is it okay if I hop in?
Go ahead.
About the, you said View Plus would be for tactile graphics. Is there a certain model that you recommended?
Not really. I mean, it really depends on, again, the volume, what you want. View Plus as a company have been known for doing the best graphics embossers, no matter, I'd say probably anything but the Braille, which is the really cheap small one.
Thank you.
Other questions?
We have a call in, someone with a call in with a question.
Okay.
Hi, you mentioned earlier that you give webinars from time to time. Could you tell us the website, your website?
It's on the NFB website. If you go to nfb.org/CENA, it stands for Center of Excellence in Non-Visual Accessibility. We offer periodic presentations that we call accessibility boutiques. And we have, you know, they'll be on topics like tactile graphics, on web accessibility, on creating accessible documents, and various other subjects. And they will be posted there when scheduled.
Great, thanks.
Yep. All right, one final question if there is one.
Yeah, it looks like Kit
Has a question.
Okay.
Hi, sorry again. Do you have any recommendations for resources about learning more about tactile graphic making them? Because I was finding that there's not a ton of information about, you know, the process and best practice and things like that.
You know, there's some information out there. BANA, the Braille Authority of North America, has some information on tactile graphics. I think View Plus in some of its training materials has some tactile graphic stuff. You're also welcome to reach out to the team you know, give the NFB a call or send us an email after the convention, and we'd be happy to point you at other resources as well and answer specific questions.
Great, thank you.
And with that, we are out of time. Matt, any closing thoughts?
You know, I don't have anything particular. Again, you know, a lot of this is case by case. You know, what your specific needs are. That's really important to keep in mind. You know, what you can afford. Again, there are some situations where again, pooling resources. If there are several students in a community needing Braille, and it might be more efficient to collectively purchase something for that kind of situation. But definitely reach out to us at the NFB. When you call the NFB's main number, there's option 5 is for the non-visual access tech team. Carl and myself and our colleague Kennedy can answer questions for specific situations. But I want to thank Casey and Carlton for inviting us to speak to you guys, and hope this has been informative and helpful for you.
Yeah, certainly, and thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of the convention, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Carl.
Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Carl, and thank you, Tina. She's the unsung hero behind these meetings.
Yes, thank you, Tina.
guys.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. You too.
Everyone.